Hello, everybody. We are starting the 6th webinar in our line, where we are trying to use the best time we have at home to prepare and to be more strong for the market that we expect to explode after this isolation. We will continue with next topic, which looks like something simple. I like simple things, but because so many people are saying about many things that are simple, like playing football or some other things, but still there are not many doing that on high level. When we got the listing to promote it and to try to sell it, sign agreement with our sellers, our duty is to do a promotion, and maybe some elder in this industry remember that when we were promoting the listings just with text, writing about the location where it is, the square feet, is it house or apartment, and what is the price. I wanted to show you some of this advertising, but all of them are in basements. So I was having to look to find some of that. A long time we are used to see the photography at least, and in more recent time the video, as we will present the listings. It is expected on the market, and nobody will look at the promotion of or advertising of some property without if there's no photo at it. It doesn't attract attention at all. So the technology used to change as well in the meantime. So maybe the elder people remember what is this in this business, some film that was necessary to make a photo. Also, there are cameras. This one were used a long time ago. I think the elders of us were not using such a camera, but still there is a film that were used to do a photo. This is how it looks in more recent time. With films and cameras that we use as the technology for making the photography. So the technology changed also, and still. Even when we forget about this technology, the same knowledge about the making picture, the same skills about making what will be on the picture is still necessary to be done very well. And the camera has no mercy. Camera is seeing everything. So if we put something on the shot, it will be visible and seen everywhere. Again, we have a post-production. In more recent time, there are so many applications that are helping us to make to prepare our photo for advertising and to promote our listing on the best way, which is our obligation, because we promise to sellers that we will promote in the best way their listing. And still, based on these photos and video presentation we do, the client buyer is able to see the value of that listing. So we are representing the value of our listing using our photo and video in our promotions. As to speak about all the necessary thing, not all. We will not be able to speak about any topic, all the important things, but some of most important things to speak about that we will. I was needed a person that is very familiar with a camera. As a matter of fact, I rarely seen him without camera when we met on the NAR conventions and elsewhere in the conferences. He is a realtor for over 22 years, And not only that, he now has a franchise with 60 agents in his, I think, 3 offices. And beside that, he was the Illinois president of Illinois Association of Realtors in 2018. And in NAR, he was having a position on the professional standards chair in the NAR. His name is Matt Difanis, my guest speaker today. Hello, Matt. Welcome.
Hello, Slaviša.
Welcome to Serbia this way for the beginning.
Perfect. I've wanted to visit and I can't get on a plane right now, so this is as good as it gets. So it's so nice to see all of you.
We will wait for you in September when we have our conference Learn to Succeed. So many speakers are already there, and we would like to see you there speaking about photography and camera.
Yeah, if those of us in the real estate profession are able to get through the short term with our incomes intact, I think there's going to be a lot of pent-up demand for the travel that people are missing out on right now. So I'm eager, as soon as it is safe to do so, I'm eager to get back on a plane. So, well, first of all, let me say a couple of things. I have a prepared presentation. I'll switch to a slide deck in just a minute, but I wanted to make sure you were aware that I'll try to watch the chat window. And certainly if you unmute yourself and ask a question, I'm open to those at any time. I have a couple of different angles that I want to cover to this. Some of what I'll cover will be the fundamentals of real estate photography in terms of camera selection, pros and cons, and techniques. But some of what I want to talk about to make it timely is how it is that the COVID-19 global pandemic has had some impact on how it is that we would approach real estate photography wearing a listing agent hat. And depending on what type of legal structure you're under, in where I work in the state of Illinois, we have buyer agency, and that exists in most parts of the United States. So if I'm working with a buyer, I'm on their side, not the seller. But I'm going to talk about this from the standpoint of being on the seller's side as a listing agent. So again, I'll try to watch the chat window. Slaviša, if I miss that, please feel free to interrupt me at any time. And let me see if I can get a screen share started and get going.
Just keep going. I was surprised as well about the topic and influence impact that is made by coronavirus. I didn't expect it in the real photography, but let us hear.
Yeah, so we'll talk first about what the current pandemic has, and I'm also eager to hear how what I'm experiencing in my market and the lockdown conditions here, how those compare and contrast with what it is that you are all experiencing in your markets. So let's start here. Traditionally, as Slaviša was saying, it's our responsibility if we're listing agents to make the spaces look their biggest, their best, their brightest. We want to highlight all that is good, and sort of implicit in that is we want to minimize anything that is bad, because traditionally our sellers want to get people in the door. They want as many showings as possible. And putting the most appealing photography out there is the best way typically to do that. And so what you would normally see, and what you still will see even in the current environment, is you want to make the houses appear their biggest. You want to use ultra wide angle photography. And I don't mean photography that distorts it so badly that it looks like a submarine, but I mean wide angle photography that makes rooms look very big. A lot of real estate photographers, whether it's real estate brokers or virtual tour providers, are using HDR, high dynamic range photography. It's a certain type of post-processing that can lend a somewhat artistic look. Same thing with various electronic filters. All of these things are designed, in the case of residential real estate, to push emotional buttons. You know, you want somebody on their handheld device or on their computer to be so swept away emotionally by these whimsical looking photos that they cannot wait to get into the door of the property. And so you're trying to get them to start falling in love with a home before they've ever been in it. However, and this is true before COVID-19, and it's now more of a concern with COVID-19, that also sets buyers up for the most common piece of feedback that I hear when I'm showing buyers homes, which is they walk inside the house for the first time and they'll look around, they'll say, this does not look anything like those photos. And usually when they say that, it's because it doesn't look as nice as it looked in the photos. And so we need to be sensitive to that, because traditionally our sellers want to see, I mean, part of the way they keep score is how many sets of people do we get in the doors? Because whether they get an offer right away or not, you can keep score by how many sets of people did I get into your house. And I'm doing my job, even if we don't have an offer yet, because my photography is luring people in the door. The problem right now is in lockdown, and it may vary depending on the nature of the lockdown conditions where you are, we got sellers who are stuck at home trying to work from home, have their kids trying to learn from home. They don't want to be chased out of their home for a showing where the buyers rule it out in 90 seconds because they quickly determine that it's not as nice as what it looked like in the photos. So right now, the COVID-19 specific context is buyers don't want to waste their time visiting houses that have not been thoroughly vetted. What I mean by thoroughly vetted is, okay, I've seen the marketing photos. I want to know everything bad that there is to know. And sometimes it's the sellers that are wanting to make sure that the buyers know everything bad there is to know, because the sellers say, before I try to clean up this house, before I try to get my family out the door when there's really no place for us to go because the restaurants and the coffee shops and the parks are closed, before I do any of that, I need to know that these people are not going to come in and immediately say, I'm not buying it because of the old furnace. So increasingly, we've got sellers who want the buyers to know all the bad stuff so that that won't come up on an unnecessary showing. So obviously with the global pandemic in process, it's people's living space, sleeping space, cooking space, bathing space. They don't want any more strangers coming through those spaces than necessary. And so if a stranger is going to be allowed in, they want to know now under the current environment that it's a situation that has the highest probability of, we're not going to have unmet expectations. We're not going to have a showing followed by, oh, this wasn't the layout that they wanted. We want to make sure they can see whether it's a layout that would work or not before they get in there. So I showed earlier on the earlier slides how we want to make properties look just perfect. And now, obviously, we have an increased emphasis on showing the imperfections. And so obviously the photo on this slide is a joke. You're not going to put that in a marketing photograph. But I will tell you, one of the things that I do when I'm taking a listing is stuff that I would not put in my marketing photo gallery. I'll still take photos of so that I have it on file. And the best examples would be non-photogenic aspects of the house, such as taking a photograph of the furnace, the heating unit, the air conditioning unit, the electric service panel, mechanical parts of the house. And if it's new or expensive or fancy, then yes, it may go into the photo gallery that's part of the listing. But if it's not, or worse, if it's old and it's a net negative to the listing, I'm not going to put it in the photo gallery and I'm not going to mention it, but I'll have it on file so that if somebody says when trying to decide, do I want to go and see it? If I've got a large listing inventory, I'm not going to remember the age of every furnace on every property, but I can go back into my non-public photo records and pull up the photo of the furnace or the manufacturer's tag that shows me the model number and serial number, where I can, even if the seller doesn't know the age, I can cross-reference it. And so we now have an actual desire for sellers to make sure the buyers are aware of everything that is wrong before the buyers come in, because the sellers don't want to have the buyers come in and then hear everything that's wrong. No, let me tell them before, and if they still want to see it, then let's get them in. But that's very different. It has changed a lot in the last few weeks. So one of the things that this has created an emphasis on is 3D immersive tours. So Matterport happens to be one of the better known platforms. It's certainly not the only one. I was the first real estate broker in my market area several years ago to invest in the first generation Matterport camera. And now I'm on my second generation camera. Now, depending on your market, depending on your revenue, Matterport may be wildly unaffordable. In the United States, it's about a $5,000 or $6,000 investment plus subscription fees. But there are now, more recently, much more inexpensive options. But the reason that 3D is so important is if traditionally as listing agents, we're showing select photos that are only going to be the prettiest views of every room. I talked earlier about how in many cases you've got buyers that say, well, once they've seen it, that layout doesn't work. Well, why did you not know that before you saw the house? Well, because the photos only showed me one view, and the prettiest view of each room, I couldn't tell that from the opposite corner, there wasn't enough space for my furniture to fit. or there's no place for my upright piano to go. And so the 3D tours have the advantage of, at every point along the way, the buyer or prospective buyer can see every wall of every room and can see how the pieces fit together. So this is something I happen to have been doing for years, but I will say under the current environment, it's a much, much more valuable tool than it had been before, because people no longer want to go see a property just to see a property, and sellers don't want to let buyers in unless they've been thoroughly vetted. So the 3D tours make it easier to show everything you can. Now, I mentioned a minute ago that in the United States, there goes one of my, both of my Irish setters. But in the United States, you have the Matterport camera, which is what is shown on the right on this slide. That's a very expensive proprietary piece of hardware. However, the Matterport service, the actual server-side processing service that reverse engineers the 360-degree scans into this full, what it calls dollhouse view, that shows the inside, how the entire floor plan fits together in 3 dimensions, that can now be done with a relatively inexpensive subscription, and then using any number of 360-degree consumer cameras that you can just buy off the shelf at Amazon or at a photo retailer. And these, if you're not familiar, these are the type that are relatively thin. The body of it is a little bit thicker than a smartphone, and then it has 2 hemispherical lenses that stick out, and it's creating a 360-degree field of vision. So those are now compatible with Matterport as a much less expensive alternative. And you can also post those to YouTube, the 360, where somebody walks through holding it on a selfie stick, and the viewer on YouTube, every point along the way, as the agent is giving the tour, can see in 360 degrees. So we have more options for how we would do that. And I think I managed to just make a green mark on my own slideshow. I'm going to show you very quickly what this looks like. And let me mute the audio. Well, let's see. This is just an example of how these Ricoh Theta cameras can be used to do this. And I'm not going to show you the whole thing. I'll show you about a minute of it. But you're seeing very, very small monopod. The device is only slightly larger than a smartphone. And then you've got something that shows 360 degrees. So I would argue that this type of thing is a net positive under normal real estate circumstances, but it's a bigger deal right now during COVID-19, where people don't want to be going into other people's spaces unnecessarily unless they know, oh yeah, my furniture will fit in that living space. And it's kind of funny in the example being shown in the video, lots of glass. And so you may have somebody who says, there's not enough wall space for me to put the furniture that I have. So that's an example of how, in United States dollars, how a product that's more like $400 as opposed to the Matterport camera that's $4,000 can be used to accomplish much of the benefit that I'm getting from Matterport. Let's see if I can get advanced. There we go. So also in the context of COVID-19, if you've got an owner-occupied property that needs to be on the market, but you've got owners that don't want to have any more people in than necessary. And I'll give you an example. I live with, my mother-in-law has lived with me for many years, and so she is old enough that we want to take every precaution that she does not get exposed, because she's somewhere around 87 years old. If you have a seller who has to get a home sold, but has somebody who's at risk and is super sensitive about not getting exposure to COVID-19, I'm seeing, at least in my market area, I'm seeing instances of listing agents doing their listing appointment with the seller, guiding them through the house using FaceTime or Skype or Messenger. Now, it's not perfect because, as I said earlier, this is not going to show enough detail to see if the paint is chipped or to see if there's caulk that needs to be replaced, where the backsplash hits the counter. But it is a way that you got sellers saying, I don't want any more sets of people in this house than absolutely necessary, but I have to be able to get my market analysis, get your pricing recommendation, and find out what I need to do. And I really don't want you making several trips into my house. So we are starting to see some cases of DIY virtual showings, either to the listing agent or occasionally as I said earlier in my example, a buyer wants to know specifically, I need to see this part of the house before I know if it's one I want to go and see in person. And in some cases, you've got listing agents getting sellers to do that. Hey, would you do me a favor and go shoot photos or video of this specific item that is not in my marketing photos, because this buyer wants to know more detail before they decide. So that's what I wanted to talk about that is specific to COVID-19. And now the rest of what I want to talk about, I think, sounds more like what Slavisha thought I was going to be talking about, which is going to be things like photography and approaches. And I'll pause for a minute. I don't know if I lost my chat window. Let me pause for a minute and see if anybody has any questions. Okay, so if not, and Slavisha, I'm not seeing the chat window on my monitor right now, so be sure to interrupt me if you need to. So,
I'm following that. I will only, you showed a property that is destroyed, that is in bad shape.
Right.
But, you know, sometimes we have customers that are looking for such properties.
Right.
How do you advertise such a properties? Because it doesn't look nice, but it's still the property for investment. Somebody that would like to refurbish it or to destroy it and to build another. That's an interesting property. How you present that?
Yeah. So the good news in the case of that type of property, the good news is that those are usually vacant. Now, sometimes you've got a rundown property that's in bad shape that still is being occupied. If it's vacant, it simplifies things, because right now with COVID-19, the concern is sellers who are living in the space that has to be shown. If it's an old rental property that's been sitting vacant and deteriorating for the last 2 years, it's not nearly as big a deal, because having people go in, having 50 sets of people go in, no big deal, because it's nobody's living and breathing and sleeping space. So, but I would tend to advocate, if you know that the best buyer is going to be an investor and somebody with cash, because again, speaking from an American perspective, something that's in really rough shape is not going to be able to be financed using the most common types of financing. If it's in really bad shape, a traditional 30-year fixed rate loan that gets sold on the United States secondary mortgage market will not be compatible with a property like that. So I would argue that you're probably doing your job for the seller if you make quite clear, here is exactly what that needs, so that the investor, who is the right person, knows I have that capability, I have that cash before I go see it. And likewise, you don't want a bunch of people who think they're going to buy it as their first time buyer, owner occupied house, if there's no way they could ever finance it. So that's a good question. But I tend to, even when we're wearing a listing agent hat, we're on the seller's side, I tend to advocate on the side of just be really upfront about what it is that it needs.
Okay.
All right, so I'm going to talk through photo equipment options, and I'm going to talk pros and cons. And then I am a very serious photographer. I've done professional photography work over the years, portraiture, landscape, and of course, lots of real estate stuff. So I'm very eager to field questions either about technique or equipment at the end of this, but I'm going to start with this quick overview of the different types of equipment that you're going to find available to you in the marketplace. So the first one I want to talk about is smartphones, because of the fact that they are ubiquitous. Everybody already has one in their pocket. And as a serious photographer, until very recently, I would always look down with condescension on somebody who is shooting photos with a smartphone, because as a serious photographer, if I've got the money and I'm willing to carry something like this around with me, the idea that somebody's using something like this, is beneath me. I feel like it's not going to do a very good job. However, basically the last 2 years have changed a lot of that, because smartphones, they still don't compete directly with real cameras, but they are so much better than they used to be. And I can tell you, I currently own a Samsung Galaxy S10 Plus. So it's a high-end current model Android. And I know that its 3-lens camera is very, very comparable to what the iPhone 11 Pro would offer. Both of these do very good jobs, very serviceable jobs. I would never shoot a listing with it because I don't have enough control. And because if I'm shooting under available inside light, these are still not going to capture nearly enough light to have low noise images. Because as consumers, even on a smartphone screen, have high definition and beyond, they're looking at a lot of detail. And if they're seeing a lot of nasty looking noise in the shadows, that does make the images not look professional. And you also don't have a lot of control for, for example, the room that I'm in. If I'm trying to shoot it from back there and I've got all the windows, smartphones don't have a lot of manual control. And so you typically get the room looking dark because it's exposing for the windows. So the cons are, you obviously have small sensors. You don't have a lot of light sensitivity. You have severe limits to how much manual control you have. And even a phone like mine that does have 3 lenses on the back, plus the selfie cam, even that still is not the same as being able to pick my lens on an interchangeable lens, mirrorless or SLR. And also the other thing that you'll find is it's become increasingly common on high-end smartphones to have an ultra wide angle lens. But an ultra wide lens on these causes barrel distortion. By that, I mean it's not a fisheye, but it will tend to cause some curvature to the verticals at the edges of the frame. And so you need those to be perfectly straight, and a cheap ultra wide on a super small sensor on a smartphone is not going to do that. So architecturally, it's not ideal. It's good for showing a lot of space, but it's not ideal. Also, those ultra wide lenses are fixed focus, and they tend to be the lowest quality lens if you have a phone that has multiple camera lenses on it. So the ones that we would use as real estate professionals to get the widest view tend to be the worst lenses on the camera. So the next step up from that, if you're not going to get a professional level camera, the next step up would be a compact or advanced point and shoot, but something that's small. And I own the one that's shown here in the slide. That's a Canon G7X Mark III. That is a 1-inch sensor camera, which means that the image sensor is a fraction of the size of my full frame mirrorless, but it is a multiple of the size of a smartphone. And so if you buy a good quality compact point and shoot, you have better low light, you have better physical controls for dialing in what you need. My best example being you're shooting the room with all the windows, click, 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 raise the exposure, and you can just do it by spinning your thumb, and you're watching the exposure go up to account for the light coming in the windows, and you have a fair bit of manual control built in. The bad thing about the compact point and shoots is they're not interchangeable lens, and as a result, the wide end of a standard compact camera zoom lens is not typically going to be quite as wide as what we as real estate professionals would normally want to shoot an inside space with. So again, feel free to ask me questions as we move along, but if you're talking about 35 millimeter focal lengths, normally the widest you're going to find on one of these point and shoot cameras, and that's if you're paying attention and buying one that goes pretty wide, will be the equivalent of a 24 millimeter lens. But I would tell you that when I'm shooting a home interior, and especially if you're shooting smaller spaces, depending on your markets, you may be shooting apartments or spaces that don't have rooms anywhere near as big as the one that I'm standing in. And if that's the case, you're probably, instead of a 24 millimeter wide angle lens, you may want something more like a 15, 18, or a 20 millimeter. If you get wider than 15, then you start really, even if the verticals stay vertical, you start getting some distortion like the front. Yeah. So what are we holding up? I can't ID it. Oh, okay. An 18 millimeter. Exactly. Perfect. Yeah. So on a full frame equivalent, or the equivalent of a 35 millimeter full frame camera, that 15, 18, 20-ish range will be notably wider than the 24 millimeter wide end on these cameras. You can, in many cases, buy an adapter that screws over the top, but it's not, you're adding more glass, and it's not going to be optically nearly as good. I own this one because it's great for video. And so you're going to have a different presentation about video, but that's a great tool for video as well. So the last category, and the one I have here in front of me, is the camera that you're seeing in the slide. This is a Nikon Z7. And I have been a Nikon DSLR shooter, and now this is my first mirrorless. And so, that requires a commitment. So as I say at the end of this slide, don't bother making that commitment if you're only going to shoot in auto mode. Because the camera doesn't know you're shooting a house. The camera doesn't know what the right settings are to get the light to look the way it needs to and the depth of field to make sure a whole room is in focus. But if you're willing to make a little bit of a commitment, or if you have the ability to hire a staffer who can be trained up or who already is a photo nerd, the big advantages of a mirrorless or an SLR, whether it is a crop sensor or a full frame, either one, it's still going to be a much larger image sensor than the compact and several times larger than a smartphone. You have, depending on the platform that you buy, you have a variety, and in some cases a huge variety of lenses, so that you can make sure that your inside lens is the right one for getting the most flattering views of inside spaces, but you can switch to a different lens because the wide angle lens is not what I want to use for the outside of a building. A lot of virtual tour providers in my market do just that. The right lens to make the inside spaces look big. They keep the same lens on and they shoot the outside of the property with the same lens, but that would be like getting up into somebody's face with a wide angle lens. It makes their nose distorted and look like their nose is pointing out at you. It's a very unflattering way to shoot outside of architecture. So with interchangeable lens cameras, you get to pick the right lens for the right occasion. With mirrorless is what is letting me, even through what looks like an optical viewfinder, this is still showing me an actual view of what the image sensor is getting. So before I click the button, it used to be on my SLRs, click, review, adjust, click, review, adjust until I get my settings the way I want. On a mirrorless, you're actually looking in real time through a high quality electronic viewfinder and seeing exactly what you're going to get before you click. So there are some advantages there. The other advantage is external flashes. And that doesn't mean a studio flash setup, but what I would say is in a lot of spaces, I would want to use a bounce flash. So put a flash gun that mounts directly to the top of the camera and bounce it off of the ceiling to create, if it's a light colored, neutral colored ceiling, to create a fill light. So you have way more lighting options on any type of camera with a flash shoe. And then lastly, on the pros, lastly, but very importantly, if you're somebody who either is fluent in Photoshop or is willing to become fluent in Photoshop or Lightroom, you can shoot in digital negative format, which just gives you so much more control. And so I'm going to use Andy's background as an example. So if I wanted to get a still shot, and right now his lighting is really cool because it looks like he's near a window, but the background is really, really dark. And that's a cool dramatic effect. But if I were shooting a digital negative still image, I could increase the shadows considerably so that the background would come alive. And I have the latitude to do that while still maintaining good image quality. On a cell phone, the image sensor is so small that if you do any of those types of adjustments, you just get some really nasty noise and you just lose all sorts of detail. So being able to shoot digital negatives and manipulate those is a huge benefit. But again, only if you're actually going to take advantage of it. If you're not going to mess with it and you're going to shoot everything in auto, you're probably better off with an advanced point and shoot. And I will say you can get around the limit on the wide angle on an advanced point and shoot by doing panorama and stitching more than one together. So the downsides of DSLRs or mirrorless, they can be expensive, but especially crop sensors, what has happened is in the last several years, full frame has become sort of the professional and expensive stuff. Crop sensor, which just means full frame means it's the same size as a 35 millimeter film frame. Crop sensor means that it is about a third smaller than that. The crop sensor cameras are smaller, lighter, cheaper. And they have the added benefit of making it easier to keep an entire room in focus, because if you use a full frame camera with a really light sensitive lens, I don't want it to look like a portrait where the coffee table is in focus, but the back wall of that room is blurred. I need the whole room to be in focus. Real estate photography really requires that. So you can get mirrorless or DSLRs very inexpensively now. And you can get, depending on the platform, some pretty affordable lenses. I say in here, beware of using only the kit lens, because if you're using only the kit lens, you're going to be no better off than an advanced point and shoot that does not have an interchangeable lens. The kit lens isn't going to go very wide. It's not going to go very telephoto, and it's not going to be very light sensitive. It's very good quality optically, but it won't do what we need as real estate professionals particularly well. But depending on the platform that you're using, you can get third-party lenses, Tamron, Sigma being probably the most prolific of those, and get something that's wide angle, very high quality, but less expensive than the original equipment manufacturer's lens. And as I say, it does take much more of a commitment. So if you're going to do that, I encourage you to make the training available. And that may just be online training, subscribing to something like Skillshare, for example.
Well, it looks impressive with all of this technology, but usually we do it with cell phone. The basic question, I'm sure for most of the agents is, can I do with such advanced smartphones and cell phones, can I do a good replacement, an acceptable replacement for promoting the listing and putting it on the website?
Yes. So what I would tell you is, if I were challenged to go shoot a listing, a high-end listing, and do it only with my cell phone, and I had no other tools but that, I bet that in most cases I could make that happen and an average consumer would not know. Now, that's because certain photographic principles, how it is that you get how you frame up the image, how you put it together, those are going to be the same whether I'm shooting with this or whether I'm shooting with an expensive piece of professional equipment. So a couple of, going back to smartphones, because that's what everyone already has, wherever possible, make sure that you're using a good quality smartphone, because the inexpensive ones are going to have much less advanced camera features. So on my Samsung, if I want to, I can go in and do quite a lot of manual control. I mentioned the example of the windows causing the room to underexpose. And on a real camera, I can click, click, click and increase the exposure with a physical control. I can do all of that on my smartphone, but those are all going to be software controls. You have to go into advanced or pro mode, and you have to go into the exposure setting, and you're going to have to, do quite a few more touches on the screen. But I would say if you've got a high quality current generation smartphone, or even one that's a few years old that's not a super high ender, if you make an effort to get into the most manual override methods of photography, then yes, you can accomplish much of what I was talking about. And the part of the reason it's important to go manual is everyone's used to seeing people. I mean, back when we could go to restaurants and restaurants were open, everyone's used to seeing people post on Instagram the pictures of their food. And even in a dimly lit restaurant, you can get an okay photo on Instagram. But the reality is a lot of those are blurry or noisy because they were taken in low light with a camera phone that doesn't tolerate low light very well. If you start to learn what works and what doesn't, some of the same principles that apply. This will do okay if it gets enough light. How do I get this more light? I slow down the shutter speed, and I look at getting a very cheap tripod with a cheap cell phone clamp on it so that I can do a longer exposure and get indoor rooms that don't have lots of light to expose beautifully on a smartphone. So yeah, there's lots of ways that we can do that.
So if I would like to make a good photos, and if I promise to, as I promised to my sellers that I will represent it in the best way, as all of us are doing that, then it is better to invest in good camera, or if you don't invest in good camera, you have to have a first quality of top quality of your cell phone. Mm-hmm. So if you don't have a professional camera and you have a bad cell phone, then you will not do any job. Huh? Did I understood well?
Yeah, I think so. And the other thing that I would say to look at is, we as real estate professionals often lose sight of what it's like if you're a buyer. And so when I'm training my staff on how to do the photography workflow that I do, I have to remind them, guys, you need to shoot the photos, both in terms of the sequencing, how we order the photos, but also how it is that we compose the shots. You need to remember that our audience is going to be people who have never been inside this floor plan and don't know it. So by definition, if you're in there with your smartphone taking pictures, you're able to look around and piece it all together in your mind. But you have to remember when you're putting together your photo gallery, I have to do it in a way that will take somebody who has not been inside the house and make it so that their brain is logically putting all of these pieces together as well. And so I would encourage you, if you're not somebody who's a natively expert photographer, if you don't consider yourself an artist with a great eye for photography, just pretend that you are a consumer and go onto one of your consumer real estate websites and just look at what you, if you were pretending to be a buyer, what differentiates a bad set of listing photos from a good set of listing photos? Because the easiest tip is find out what you recognize on a house that you haven't been in. This is a good one, this is a bad one, and how can I make mine look more like that? But that's going to be a very logical sequence. So in my market, where much of what I sell are single family detached houses, that's always going to be starting from the front door, even though in my market, most of the people have attached garages. So the homeowner is coming and going through a different part of the house. But for showings, for the photo gallery, I need to start at the front door. And I need to have a logical progression from the front door to the front entryway to whatever front living areas there are, and make it so somebody clicking through knows. And don't leave out a step. Remember, as you're there holding your phone or your camera, you can see how the rooms fit together. But if you leave out a photo, so let's just say I was coming into my living room over my shoulder and I shot in this direction. If I don't remember to turn around and shoot from the opposite corner, I'm going to leave out an important piece where a buyer who's clicking through can't put the pieces together and they're left with large gaps. And that also means if they're left with large gaps, we go back to the issue I talked about at the very beginning, which is I couldn't see enough to know that it wasn't going to work for me. And if it wasn't going to work for me, then why am I wasting my time putting footprints in your listing?
For me, that logical sequence of showing the photos of the property is something that I expect. I was expecting that. As a matter of fact, I was dealing a little bit with photography since my childhood.
You're a scientist. That's how your brain is natively wired, and that is to your credit. So you're exceptional in that sense, because most of us who are real estate professionals are more personality driven and a little bit less of that highly methodical, linear sort of thought process. Your brain is natively wired where that is how you would do it. Many of us are not natively wired that way. And so we constantly have to remind ourselves, if I had never been in this house before, do I need to take one more photo from one more vantage point so that the person who's clicking through it on their phone can make sense of it and get a complete picture?
Yeah. Naturally, but I was always surprised when somebody of my colleagues start first photo is the bathroom.
Right.
Great.
Yes.
We start from the bathroom, so you represent.
Because it's only going to get better from there.
Showing the bathroom at first. For me, something else was naturally. But tell me, when you have 60 agents, are they doing the photography of the listings personally, or who does it?
So it varies. So again, I'll give you my perspective from my little part of the world. So in the United States, you'll get very expensive markets, and I'll use San Francisco as my favorite example. In San Francisco, you can't buy really anything for under $1 million. And so if you're a listing agent and every listing is $1 million or more dollars, the revenue for even an average listing is enough to hire a full video production crew. And so the expectations are much higher. My market, the median price in my market is something like $160,000, $160,000. And so the revenue for an average listing here is not enough to be spending $1,000 on a really high-end dedicated professional photo shoot or video shoot. So like many of you, you have to come up with an economical alternative. And so in my market, there's 3 different categories. One would be the realtor does it completely on his or her own, and in some cases uses nothing more than this. Some of the listings I click through when I'm trying to decide what to show a buyer, I can tell the photos were taken with a smartphone and they're terrible. Others, I might look and think they may have been taken with a smartphone, but they were executed well. So one category is they just do it that way. I have a realtor colleague in my neighborhood just got into the business. His first listing, because I live in a reasonably high-end neighborhood, his first listing was almost $600,000. That's, in my market, that's very, very high-end. And he only did photos with a cell phone. And it sold in like 3 days. So he's getting a huge paycheck and used nothing but his cell phone. The second category would be agents who hire a local virtual tour provider. Now, I am in a small metro area, so we don't have lots and lots of these providers, but there are 2 or 3 local companies that a lot of the realtors will call. I have a new listing. I want to schedule a virtual tour photography shoot, and that may be Matterport. One of the companies has Matterport as an option, or it may be just a still photography shoot. That's not wildly high end. It's not super artistic. Their photographers are not getting paid a lot of money, and they're not artists, but it's a better way than an agent who's not very good at it. It's way better than somebody who doesn't know what they're doing, going in and only doing smartphone pictures. And then the third option would be something on the higher end where either you're going in with a real serious camera, the agent is him or herself, or in my case, I do have staff that I've trained. So real estate photography is not terribly artistic. It's much more workflow driven. So I can teach somebody, here's how the workflow needs to look, and here are the standard locations and vantage points that I need you to make it into.
Do you teach your agents? Do you teach your agent?
No, because in my case of my team, one of the advantages for keeping agents on my team, now not my company, but my team, is that my staff will do all the photography so the agents don't ever have to worry about it. But I do end up, every time I hire a staffer, a field staffer, I do have to make sure that I'm training on that. And so I've gotten pretty accustomed to which items in terms of how to shoot get put into the workflow so that somebody who's not an artist, not an experienced photographer, in a pretty short period of time can replicate the workflow that I have as somebody who is a serious photographer and who's been doing this for 22 years.
If I see well among the participants at this webinar, I don't see anybody from San Francisco. So I think all of the people are coming from some less expensive area. So do you think if we work in less expensive area that it will be, let's say, obligatory for agents to pass some courses or to get some knowledge about getting photography as one of the basic things in our job?
So because I am in an affordable market area where you can't just hire somebody for an unlimited budget on a photo shoot, I would say one of the best uses of time when you're stuck at home is make sure you're skill building. And if your workflow is one where either you're in a small market where there isn't a go-to virtual tour company to call, or if you're in a small market, low price, and there's just not enough revenue to be able to pay anybody else to do any part of it, you really have to do all of the photography and all of the marketing yourself because there's not a budget for it, then absolutely the single best thing you can do is do some courses on something like Skillshare or Lynda, LYNDA.com. I'm a subscriber there, and you've got the ability to watch online courses taught by extraordinary photographers, and many of those are targeted for beginners. So you look at stuff like that, and even if you were never going to advance beyond a cell phone, a good quality cell phone and just knowing the appropriate technique will get you such a long way. So I would suggest for a time frame when a lot of people can't be out doing the things that they're used to doing, as long as you got a decent internet connection, I would strongly recommend doing some photography stuff. You just have to be careful that it's not, obviously portrait photography and landscape photography is quite different than architectural photography.
Okay, Matt, we have participants here from, as far as I see, from South Africa, from Florida, from Bulgaria, from Bosnia and Herzegovina. But one participant I would like to invite particularly because I know he's dealing with photography and he's doing some job in that manner. Hello, Andy.
Hello, Slavi. How are you?
We were speaking about different things you do in photography, but I didn't quite understand quite well. What is your job? You are helping the realtors. You are not realtor, and you are helping the realtors to make a good photography.
Well, yeah. First of all, thank you, Matt, for the presentation. It was very informative. Very interested in the new technology. Is really interesting. I wasn't aware that was actually at such a level at the moment, but that's really cool. And from a photography basis for the real estate sector, that's got to be a huge let's say, thing in your pocket to be able to bring out, especially at this particular moment. So congratulations on that and seeing that. I'm not a professional photographer. I'm not a real estate agent. My future wife is a professional photographer, however. So I do have a basic understanding of what you were explaining and how you were explaining it. But I can say very quickly, I don't want to take too much of everyone's time, but I'm an international investor. I invested in a company in Finland called Pick Miller 4 years ago. For the last 3 years, we've been creating awareness for the service and the system, which basically enables people to improve the quality of the photos they've taken on site when they go to take pictures, to represent the property. And as Levy said earlier on, we want to get the best pictures possible, but we also have to look at the facts, and that being that, I just stepped out while you were going through the final 3 points, but I would imagine the third point was to pay a professional photographer to take pictures of the property, which is happens a lot, and when that happens, that's great. But as a professional photographer yourself, the person who created Pick Miller is a professional photographer, and even he had 10 or 15% of his pictures that he wasn't happy with.
And what's the name of the service again, please?
Pick Miller.
How's it spelled?
Pickmiller. It's pickmiller.com. It's a Finnish company. Yeah. And so agents can go to the site.
Andy, can you write it in the chat box?
Yeah, sure. I'm not quite sure where the chat box is, but hang on, let me see.
I just did.
Thank you. So the service was created really for this purpose to, it's so interesting what you said, actually, because people with different levels of understanding of perception of pictures, for example, what time to take the picture, only for the lights. We even mentioned it with the light, which you might just put the other light backlight on, so you can see the rhino, let's say. But the perspective of taking a picture even from outside a building across the street, and how that building could be looking incorrect in photograph. There are simple, basic things that people can do to make their pictures much better, like you said. And somebody like yourself who's obviously into photography, invested into photography in the sense of the equipment, you're the triple threat on the real estate side. You've got the technological understanding, you've got the practical application understanding, and you've got the ability to sell the property. So you're a little bit unique in having those three wonderful skill sets. A majority of real estate agents want to sell properties, so taking pictures is a bit of a challenge for them. And
Andy, I do now on Pick Miller. I have the web page that I've screen shared, and this is showing. Now, this is one where, if I'm not mistaken, the app probably causes the smartphone to take a burst of photos, and then it's merging them together and doing several adjustments. But yeah, this is a great service.
Thanks for that, though, but it's not an app. We have our own graphic designers that do this work. This is done by graphic designers
I mean, even for the photo capture, are you taking just a single image, or are you taking a series of images?
No, a single image, which is uploaded onto the platform, and we will fix that image. But you could go onto our platform, you can test the service. The first 3 pictures are free. And we really, I mean, this time for us is starting to show people moving online. It's a very important time for us to make sure we do a good job for our partners and our clients all over the world, let's say. But this system has been available for the last 3 years. It takes a long time to get any kind of important new service into a market, as you probably know. Even when you're selling properties, for example, you have to work with a number of people with different levels. So you've got that understanding, obviously, which is wonderful. But when we're talking about brokers who are going out into the market, first young people, they want to sell properties, they need all the help they can get, right? So this service is one of the things that can help them. They can go with the smartphone or the camera, no matter how appropriate the equipment would be, let's say, for the person's own personal skill set. We can still help people. And I think it's worth mentioning, you can see this, Matt, from the history of the company. The person who created this company is called Alexei Sarpaneva. The Sarpaneva name in Finland is incredibly well known. His father was a design guru. I mean, really one of the most creative. Half the stuff you see in IKEA has come from stuff he created in the past.
Okay.
So he's got this incredible background, but a very appropriate and straightforward process to taking pictures, which is really, really cool. And to be honest enough as a professional photographer and say, 10% or 15% of my pictures I need help, and not be able to find that platform, that's what inspired him to create the platform. So this is really important. The platform was created for people like yourself, like my future wife, people who adore taking pictures, they're into it, they take their time and effort, they invest in the equipment. But still, you know how it is, there can always be. So if that can happen to you, for example, or him, then let's think about all the people who spend so much time and effort going on site, taking pictures. We, you know, my mind, let's say on the business side, again, sorry to take, I don't want to take too much time. My side is always to reduce cost, save time and increase profits, right? So if somebody's got a service or a product they can use that can help them do that, then it's very valuable to them individually and also to a group. So, you know, you mentioned Remax. I'm big friends with Remax in this part of the world, you know, with Greece and with Bulgaria and what have you. And a lot of the big companies overseas, like Coldwell Banker and what have you. The reason for that is...
you, Matt, thank you, Andy, very much for this contribution. Matt, you mentioned one very important thing that I find when we speak about making a perfect photo. And that is what will buyer see when he came after seeing the perfect photo. We were speaking in the last conference, Learn to Succeed, about staging, about, so now we're speaking about how to make a perfect photo, to do application, to remove the things, to, you know, to do makeup, to do a makeup. But it's very important why we do it. We do it to present in the best way the property, and to make it able of our clients to see the value of that property. But we are not doing to, if the client comes there after and say, well, it's not that property, then we didn't do a good job. Do you agree with me? You are a realtor. You are in that situation to protect the value in front of the buyer.
Yeah, and the other thing I would point out, now this is different in the United States than other places, but the National Association of Realtors, in the United States, real estate license laws vary from state to state. Those are state laws. And so there's a patchwork of 50 different states plus US territories with differences in their license laws. But the National Association of Realtors Code of Ethics is uniform nationally. And Article 12, which is, and I'm the professional standards chair for the National Association of Realtors this year. So we are, as a committee, we are the keeper of the Code of Ethics. Article 12 of the Code of Ethics, which applies to all 1.4 million realtors throughout the United States, requires that realtors have an ethical obligation to paint a true picture in all of their marketing. And so I will say that you'll see on the extreme end, if somebody is, and the classic example is a property is underneath high voltage power lines and somebody photoshops out the high voltage power lines. Well, clearly they've now materially altered the photo and have misled people. But less obvious would be at some point just hyper processing a photo to make it look drastically different, even though they didn't delete furniture or do anything that actually, you know, like deleting the high voltage power lines. But still, you may get to a point where there is a subjective determination that that was no longer painting a true picture and therefore could be deemed an Article 12 violation and subject somebody to sanctions. Now, I will say on the Pick Miller site, this is high praise coming from me. The after photo that is shown, to my eye, does not look hyper processed. So I'm always looking at this stuff to make sure, is that one of those that now looks like a painting where there's no way the room actually looks like that? And I would argue that in the case of Pick Miller, that type of treatment is designed to make it look more like it does to the human eye. Because
exactly
the problem with the smartphone camera is, I gave the example of the light coming in the windows.
Exactly.
Smartphone camera sees the light coming in the windows, makes everything else a little too dark. And the human eye sees from very, very bright to very dark. And we mentally piece that together. So the high praise for Pick Miller platform is, what I'm seeing is not that it's making it look artificial. In fact, it's making it look a little more like it probably would look in person to the human eye and the human brain.
And that's exactly what we're trying to do, Matt. You know, the basic common sense of it, you understand it implicitly, obviously, but it's not so simple to explain to the normal person who doesn't have the experience, let's say. But I'll give you one example of what you've just said, just to lighten the mood a little bit. Somebody sent a picture to us and said, can you fix the outside of the building? And could you remove the no parking, parking not allowed sign outside? So, of course, we said, no, we can't do that, because that would have been a misrepresentation. Somebody could have gone there, not seen the sign, bought the property, and then realized they can't park the car outside, as an example. So I absolutely get what you're saying there. So we don't do anything like that. We don't add or remove. You know, we can, let's say it's a rainy day, we can make it a day with blue sky, for example. If the pool is dirty, we can make it clean. This type of thing to show exactly what it would be like in the right circumstances and the right time. But it's done by graphic designers. We use standard software. They're very talented people. We do it in Bulgaria. We have remote people. We do it in other parts of the world as well, and we're able to do large numbers of pictures if necessary. And we can also negotiate good rates for big organizations. But our services, in its heart, let's say, is to help a broker or an agent when they go on site to save them time. The bigger thing as well, and again, sorry, I don't want to take too much time, but if a person goes, I sent Slavy the advert actually I made for Pick Miller. I hope he can share it with you. We don't need to show it now in any way, but just to see it, because it's actually a day in the life of a broker, and the time and effort that can be put into to go into the property, to want to take good pictures with the right mentality and everything, get home, uploading them, and they're completely, it's a whole day wasted kind of thing, which, as an employer, you can't afford brokers or agents to do that. So it's a system kind of thing to help people do that. And this is where the heart of the company is. The heart of the company is to help real estate agents. That being said, we're also now morphing into much bigger, much more interesting and let's say high quality pictures that we're helping a lot of companies that we didn't expect. It's just something that's happened given the circumstances, but very high quality pictures that we can also help and soften a little bit and assist those types of businesses, which is like product placement pictures, for example, or cars. Anything online has a picture, and we can help with that picture. So that opens the door for us.
Great, Andy. We could make the agreement that you will be a sponsor of one of the seminar, that one of the course that we could have for the Balkanian realtors.
You had to spoil it, didn't you?
You're just in a good place.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would also add one more thought, which is even with the world's most talented graphic design artists using great software, the better the quality, the more data you have to give them, the more they can mine out of that photo. So once again, they can probably get very good results from a well-executed smartphone photo, and probably mine considerably more out of a larger sensor photo coming from an advanced point and shoot or a full frame interchangeable type of camera. But everything that Andy said would still go back to, they can't fix if you blur it. They can't fix if you don't compose it right. What they're fixing is dynamic range issues and exposure and white balance issues. But still no substitute for having the technique when you go out there with the lens.
We can talk about white balance and noise, because there is noise on pictures, as you probably know, but most people don't. So, these things I've had to educate myself on, which is very interesting for me. But like I said, thank goodness my partner is in a very high level for that and has helped me immensely. And we're going to be helping our partners internationally with some new products and services shortly, which one of them I'm talking with Slavy about. And, we will try to continue to give added value services to users, no matter what they are. This is our purpose in life, let's say, on the side of processing pictures or education and helping people understanding. I think the basic operating thing, one of the very important things you said was, if you understand the basic principles of taking a picture, even just the basic ones, it can make a huge difference to somebody, no matter what the equipment, let's say. So these things are educational, and of course there are lots of things out there that help people, when I always encourage people to educate themselves one way or the other. But you know, having the experience you've got and relating that to the real estate sector, you're able to understand the benefits for the sale, which is what the bigger part of our business is about, or not my business personally, but the real estate sector is about sales and matching the right buyer with the right home, let's say. So, you know, that's a challenge for anyone. And so anything that can make that challenge easier and quicker for both the person who's introducing the property and the person who's buying and selling the property, it helps the whole situation to go smoother, and anything that can be seen like that or can be valued like that can be really used as a benefit from the person who's introducing the property to the buyer or the seller. So, you know, this is what we think about it in a much bigger sense, like a bigger mind of what we're doing. But the basic principles of what we're trying to do is give people a quick, easy way. If they're in a spot and they need some help, they can upload their pictures with us and we'll take care of them. 24 hours, they'll have them back, and they'll be of an absolute highest quality to be able to put. They'll be proud to put those pictures online. And you know as well as I do, and all our friends who are watching at the moment all over the world, that the quality of online images is very poor. It needs to be increased just generally everywhere. So it's not, we're not pigeonholed to any particular marketplace or environment or anything like that. It's just people don't have the skill set to do it, and they're under pressure to do it to get the property out quickly. And this is the other thing now that we're moving more online. We were moving more online before the last 3 months anyway. You know, everybody knows where this business is going in the next few years. And so therefore anything online that will help and smooth the way and reduce costs is obviously valuable, depending on what it does and what it's for. So, you know, our bag is photography, but there are so many other things that are out there that can benefit from our service too. So,
okay, thank you, Andy. And we have another opportunity that is used by one of my colleagues, actually, Alexander. You were using some ads, some additions to a mobile phone, lenses that are specific and increase the power of the phone. Is it right, Dad? Alexander?
Well, yes. Hi everybody. Are we on a page? Yeah. All right.
Hi, Alexander.
So, Andy, thank you, Andy, for your pointing out some things, and thank you, Matt, for the extraordinary presentation, because we're on the same page. I could say that I'm using always for the DSLR, and I'm using my Nikon D3000, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yep, absolutely.
So with the interchangeable lenses. But you know what? Lately, well, you know, I'm carrying my iPhone. I'm getting enough of carrying about 2 kilos, 3 kilos of lenses and cameras. But I'm enjoying to make good photos, you know, trying to be different on this market, because, you know, trying to be that red leather chair, you know. So I think I made a huge mistake when I was in San Francisco. I was looking at the one camera, which was, you know, it was a pre-sale from Christmas sale, something like that. It was a Sony camera, and it was about, well, the top model, it was not over $600, which, you know, surprised me, with additional lens. And because I know that the Sony is using a lens that's the old lens from Germany, from East Germany, called Jedna. You know that lens? That's the best lens in the world. So they are very smart, and they bought that fabric in East Germany. So I think, well, my question is to you, is those Sony cameras, as they are good, as they are, I mean, for that price?
Yeah, so the first thing about Sony's is understand that Sony has an almost monopoly on image sensors. So the Nikon cameras are all Sony image sensors. That Canon point and shoot camera that I had used as an example in my presentation, also a Sony image sensor. So Sony in-house has this incredible supply of image sensor technology. Sony, at least in the United States, the Sony OEM, the original equipment manufacturer glass, is usually Zeiss branded. So yes, so you got a high quality, like German heritage brand name that's associated with being very good optics. So the Sony stuff, yes, it is good quality. What you have found, specifically the time frame you mentioned, what in the United States we call Black Friday sales, the sales that kick off the Christmas buying season.
We have that too here.
Right. So those Black Friday sales, you started to see some of those crop sensor Sony mirrorless bodies that where the bodies only could be had for just a few $100s. And then depending on what you needed, you could then build out for either real estate, or the other thing that those mirrorless Sonys have been very popular for is live streaming, because they have such good video quality. And so right now I'm coming to you from just a small webcam, but you see those being used for live streaming as well. But yeah, those are very good quality. And the advantage that the cheaper crop sensor cameras have is normally the full frame stuff is typically targeted at professionals and is more expensive. The Black Friday deals were generally on crop sensor, but that makes the body smaller. It means the lenses that go on it are a little bit smaller. It's not quite as light sensitive. The sensor isn't, because there's not as much area to gather photons. But it also means that when you're shooting real estate interiors, the depth of field is natively going to be a little greater, meaning it's easier to get a whole room into focus. So yeah, fine. And plus the Sony lens mount for those mirrorless bodies has been out long enough that you are now starting to see third-party manufacturers that are making lenses as well. So yeah, I think those are a perfectly good option for a lot of people, and they can be very versatile because I'm seeing people use them for video as well as photo.
Yeah, and additional to that, well, I could say that I'm very happy with the moment lens that I bought specially for the iPhone. It comes from United States. Well, 3 years ago, I bought from at that time, iPhone 10. I bought the special case with the 3 types of lens, which I got as you know, fish lens, and this little one 18 and one zoom. But you know, it is okay. It really improves good quality. Sometimes there is not enough lens, not enough light. But we can have what we wanted in the first step. And one thing more, I didn't see so much improvement with the 11 Pro. And you mentioned that this new model of Samsung is really good. Mm-hmm. So I will bear that in my mind.
So I have been an Android user for years. What I can tell you is, having watched detailed review videos from serious photographers, so a photography specific review video, my impression is that the iPhone 11 and the Samsung S10 Plus, in terms of 3 lenses, 3 similar applications, the quality of the photos, they're very, very comparable. So I'm an iPad owner, but I'm a Windows user and I'm an Android phone user. So I'm pretty cross-platform friendly. But so I would never tell somebody change from your Android to an iPhone or from your iPhone to an Android, because whichever of those platforms you're on, there are now some incredible options.
Yep. I was personally checked the new issue of Samsung 20 Plus Ultra, and it is
those incredible. Are crazy.
That's crazy. You can see over the street, you can see the details and maybe read what is on the door or whatever.
Now, I will say those are not for real estate, because I've been watching. I'm a technology
we are not
nerd.
Advertising that. We are not, unfortunately, right. They were not sponsors of that, but the quality.
I've looked at that, and of course, the thing you're paying a lot of money for is theoretical 8K video and this telephoto lens, and it's actually sort of mounted sideways. It's a periscope lens, so you have a real telephoto lens without it bulging way out of the back of the camera. But for real estate, neither of those things helps me any. So in looking at that critically, I would never, if I did all of my real estate photography with my smartphone, I would never be able to justify buying a new, in US dollars, $1,400 S20 Ultra for real estate, because the results would not be noticeably any better than I'm getting out of the Samsung. the one that I already have. That's the last generation.
Okay, as we are getting to close to the end of this webinar, I would ask you for the end. You mentioned that some of the speakers before we were speaking about that one of the rules for making the photos inside is to use the widest angle possible. But what are your suggestions as the minimum of the quality of the camera and the angle that should be used in some normal spaces inside?
So I'll give you a point of reference because there's no single setting or no single specification to look for, but you want to make sure whether you're using an ultra wide optical lens, like on a smartphone that has 2 or 3 different lenses, whether you're using an ultra wide lens that happens to get one image that sweeps all the way across the room, or whether you're doing it, stitching them together or doing panoramas. The big thing is you need to get a wide enough, and whatever size the spaces are that you sell, you have to get a wide enough vantage point that people, my rule is I want to be able to see the wall to the left and I want to see the wall to the right. I need to not have an endless canvas and not have a sense of where the room ends and how much furniture I can put along the walls. And so that's kind of how I look at it. And I had clients recently that were, that initially didn't like the ultra wide because they thought, well, this makes our house look much bigger than it really is. So then I reshot it using a slightly less wide lens, and they didn't like how small it made their house look. So there's not a single right answer, but you always have to go back to what I said earlier, which is, if you pretend that you are a prospective buyer who's never physically been inside that space to look around with your own eyes, are you making it look at least as big as it really does look? And are you avoiding making it look misleadingly large or misleadingly small? And I see people err on both sides. Probably the worst example with smartphones and Instagram, people are used to vertical. But for real estate and for our rooms, we still need to do horizontal all the time. And when I see these vertical pictures, these skinny vertical pictures of the biggest living space in the dwelling, like, but I don't get any sense. I can tell if it's a tall room or not, but I can't get any sense of what the space is. So there's no single benchmark for that, but you just have to constantly be critically asking yourself, if I had not been in here myself, does this give me a broad enough sweep of the room to have a sense of how much furniture can fit and if it would be usable for my lifestyle?
Even when I make a photo with somebody somewhere, I'm screaming when somebody do it exactly like for Instagram portrait.
Right.
And that please do. And often on the photos, it's my hand that is
right. Yeah.
to landscape. I wanted to see it landscape because then you see the whole scene. Well,
now, if we were women and we were wearing dresses and nice shoes, then we might care about it being vertical. But that's not the case. I'm never wearing heels that I need to make sure get shown off on Instagram.
Yeah, for sure. But we are doing with the properties, and that's exactly what the story was. Here we have to think about what is our role in this. We are not making artistic photography or some other kind of photography. We are doing the photography as to represent our listing and not to mislead our clients in that, but do the best we can to represent the potential and the value of that property. And we were trying to get answer now on how to do it from one of the best in the kind of the in our industry in photography. And who is at the same time the realtor. So the man who is taking care about why we are doing that. And Matt, thank you very much for joining us at this webinar.
So nice to meet all of the other participants today. Thank you so much. And Slaviša, it has been such a delight reconnecting with you over the last couple of weeks. It is so good to see you again, my friend.
Thank you. We will stay in touch and try to do the other good things as well. I will just give some info at the end of this webinar. In the next webinars, I think we will pass to 1 hour later. because our curfew is moving, so the people are trying to finish the job before that. And basically we are doing this for the European participants, yes, the people in Europe. And the next one will be at Friday. I bring another great speaker that is in area of technology. As we see, we are covering a lot of topics in technology, because technology is obviously getting more important these days, and will be further on. So next speaker is be one of those that is in United States, called the guru in technology. Soon, I think tomorrow you will see who will it be, and I invite you to participate. It will be at Friday later in the evening, because there is another webinar that is very interesting, and this is for the FIAPSI family. FIAPSI Association. It will be at Friday, so as not to get overscheduled the day, we will move our webinar for a little bit later. If you like this, what I'm trying to do with great speakers that are accepting my invitation and sharing that knowledge and skills with us, join us in the webinars, like YouTube channel where I put all these videos that are recorded, as the people that were not able to participate directly be able to see it later, because I'm sure that we bring the value in different topics we cover. And thank you everybody for being here. Stay active, stay safe and healthy. See you in the next webinar. Thank you again, Matt.
Thank you. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.